Have you ever looked at a dinosaur's name and thought, wow, that's wrong? This is the most random video probably on the internet. But hi, my name is Connor, welcome back to the Paleo Page, and today I'm gonna talk about a little bit something I had an idea. I looked at a dinosaur that had a really wrong name, and by wrong I mean a dinosaur whose name doesn't really fit what the dinosaur is actually like. And so then I thought, hey, let's make a list of these sort of instances, talk about why the names are wrong and how they're wrong and sort of their naming history, and then we'll put it into one long video. This video is not going to help anyone, okay? Let's just get right into it, because I think we need a bit of an example of what I'm talking about. So we're going to start off with probably the most well-known example of a dinosaur with a wrong name. This here is Oviraptor. Oviraptor was first discovered at the Flaming Cliffs, which is another name for the red sandstones of the Mongolian Late Cretaceous Jatka Formation. I don't know. How do you say that? I don't know how to say that. The Mongolian Late Cretaceous Jakta Formation. We'll just go with that. In 1923, an expedition led by North American naturalist Roy Chapman Andrews had found 3 new theropod dinosaurs. In 1924, American paleontologist Henry Fairfield Osborn had named the 3 new genera Sauronithoids, Velociraptor, and of course Oviraptor. The Oviraptor's name translates to egg thief because the initial holotype specimen of Oviraptor, AMNH 6517, was preserved and fossilized laying on top of a nest of eggs. 15 eggs actually, and that nest was cataloged AMNH 6508. Even worse for the Oviraptor, its specific name, so the species name, Oviraptor Philoceratops is intended to mean a fondness for ceratopsian eggs, because it was originally thought that these nests belonged to a Protoceratops, or some relative. Thanks to this initial description of Oviraptor, it's since been interpreted as an egg thief and an egg stealer in numerous forms of paleomedia, from dinosaur kids books to even like big blockbuster productions like Disney's Dinosaur and the Jurassic World Dominion prologue. Osborn, even though he had named the animal Oviraptor Philoceratops, he remained cautious about this name, and he would be right to be cautious, because in the 90s there would be a lot of findings to suggest that these were not eggs that the Oviraptor was stealing, but in fact the Oviraptor's eggs itself. A paper from December of 1994 by Nora et al. Described embryos found preserved within eggs found in Mongolia. They were specifically found in the Gobi Desert, and the embryos, which were preserved inside the eggs, had skull features that helped the researchers identify them as belonging to Oviraptorids. These were without a doubt Oviraptorid eggs, and then cross-examination between these eggs and the original AMNH nest found that the original AMNH nest was in fact also Oviraptorid eggs, likely Oviraptor itself. This, alongside numerous discoveries of other Oviraptorids like Psittapati, who were found also on top of nests with eggs, this solidified that Oviraptor wasn't actually an egg thief, but in fact a really good parent taking care of their brood. Now, this is the most famous story of a dinosaur with a wrong name, one that you've probably heard of, but there's a lot of dinosaurs you might not even realize have a wrong name in this sort of sense. One of those dinosaurs is actually this guy here, the Parasaurolophus. This hadrosaurid lived across the western North America during the Late Cretaceous period, and it's obviously really well known thanks to that massive crest. The crest gives the animal such a recognizable silhouette, plus it was hollow and able to produce noise. This noise, to be exact. However, despite the very prominent crest that the Parasaurolophus had, its name translates to near-crested lizard. Near-crested. I don't know about you, but that's a little bit more crested than near-crested. However, the name near-crested lizard isn't really even at all related to the size of the crest. The holotype specimen, ROM 768, was found in Alberta's Dinosaur Park Formation in 1920, and has since been housed in the Royal Ontario Museum. 2 years later, though, in 1922, paleontologist William Parks had given the animal the name Parasaurolophus walkeri. This specific name, walkeri, being in honor of the chairman of board of trustees for the ROM, Sir Brian Edmund Walker, and the genus name was in reference to another dinosaur called Saurolophus. Saurolophus, whose name means crested lizard, was a large hadrosaurid that lived in the Horseshoe Canyon and Namek formations of North America and Asia respectively. Parks had believed that the two animals would have been very closely related due to similar anatomy and because they both had a crest. And while he would be right, they are both hadrosaurids, yeah. He would also be wrong because Parasaurolophus and Saurolophus are nowhere near each other on the hadrosaurid family tree. Parasaurolophus is a Lambeosaurian, and Saurolophus is a Saurolophine. So, they're about as far apart as two hadrosaurids could really get. So, nowhere near each other. Also, it's really funny because the Parasaurolophus has a much more prominent and larger crest than the supposed crested lizard. But it's the near crested lizard. And it's nowhere near the crested lizard. It's its own thing, and now it's more famous, and, I'm gonna take a sip of my tea. Probably didn't realize it was up there. I have a stitch mark for my tea. To all my Europeans out there, I'm sorry, it is very much cold tea. Alright, sort of a running theme you'll see is dinosaurs being named after other dinosaurs or in reference to other animals, and then that relation being proven wrong. Parasaurolophus, of course, being one of those examples, but another example of that is this is a really long name, good luck editing Connor, putting this on the screen, Micropachycephalosaurus hongtuianensis. I'm surprised I remember how to say that. This small dinosaur from the late Cretaceous Jiangnan Formation in China, I'm pretty sure I said that wrong now. The initial and so far only specimen of this animal, IVPP V5542, was found on a cliff near the Hongtian train station, and it was described by Dong Ziming in 1978. The specimen is sadly super fragmentary, only consisting of these elements currently listed on screen if Editing Connor did his job right. Now, Ziming at least knew these fossils belonged to a marginocephalian dinosaur. That's the family that includes Pachycephalosaurids and Ceratopsians. But he accidentally assigned it to the wrong group, the Pachycephalosaur group. He also thought that they were found in the Wangshi Formation when they really weren't, but we'll give him a little bit of a break. He named the genus Micropachycephalosaurus obviously after Pachycephalosaurus. But further studies began to really doubt this classification, such as a paper in 2006 by Sullivan, which reevaluated the whole family of Pachycephalosauridae, and a study by Butler and Zhao in 2009, and even a paper from 2011 by Butler et al. that put Micropachycephalosaurus as a basal ceratopsian, which is sort of the most agreed upon position of Micropachycephalosaurus now. However, another phylogenetic analysis by Fonseca et al. In 2024 put this animal back into Pachycephalosauridae. So, what is the actual case? Is this dinosaur's name actually wrong, or is it potentially right? We don't know. Because, again, the fossils of this animal are super fragmentary. So, at best, to most accurately put it, we know it is a indeterminate marginocephalian. That's the best we can really put it. But I think the general consensus is that this wasn't a pachycephalosaurid and that it was a basal ceratopsian. So, by that logic, the name is wrong. Speaking of dinosaurs named after another dinosaur, we're moving on to a segment I like to call Dinosaurs with the name Raptor, even though they aren't dromaeosaurids. Well, technically the word raptor just means thief, so not all dinosaurs that are named raptor are named after dromaeosaurids, such as in the case of Eoraptor lunensis. This was one of the smallest and most basal sauropodomorphs of the late Triassic of western Gondwana, specifically in Argentina. Eoraptor lunensis was described and named in 1993 based off of the specimen PVSJ512, and its name means Dawn Thief from the Valley of Moon, which is kind of a really cool name. Now, this animal isn't named raptor in reference to dromaeosaurids. It's just named raptor because initially they thought this species was a carnivore. But now the general consensus that we know, now that we know it's a basal sauropodomorph, is that it is most likely omnivorous, potentially strictly herbivorous. But there are actually dinosaurs who are named raptor in reference to dromaeosaurids, even though they are not dromaeosaurids. One of those dinosaurs being, of course, Megaraptor naumenhuiqui. Did I pronounce that right? I don't know. The initial specimen of Megaraptor, MCF PVPH79, was found by Argentine paleontologist Fernando E. Novas in January of 1996. And the material included a large claw bone. This claw bone was originally thought to have been on the second digit of the foot, similar to the large claw of dromaeosaurids. Novus had originally thought that the animal was closely related to both dromaeosaurids and troodontids. And while he didn't really think they were actually dromaeosaurids itself, that didn't stop media from just, reconstructing it as a really large dromaeosaurid. In 2004, however, a second specimen of Megaraptor, labeled MUCPV341, was described by Giorgio Calvo, and it showed that the large claw was not on the toe, but actually on the first digit of the hand. So, in the human, the first digit is like the thumb. And since then, it's been realized that, hey, Megaraptorids are not raptors, and actually they're not even really that closely related to raptors. Well, Megaraptorids' placement has been spotty for a long time. So at one point they were thought to maybe be Allosaurids, I think. The most recent analysis of Megaraptorids' placement in the theropod family tree was in the 2022 paper that described the Megaraptorid Maipe macrothorax, and it placed Megaraptora as a sister taxa to the much more famous Tyrannosauroids. Not a big raptor, but in fact a pretty much sister of the Tyrannosaurs, which is awesome. Now this next raptor, it doesn't have a wrong name because it's named Raptor, because it is actually a dromaeosaurid. However, it's on the list because of the first part of its name. This here is Bambiraptor, a small dromaeosaurid from the late Cretaceous of Montana. The initial skeleton was first described by 14-year-old fossil hunter Wes Linster in 1995. The skeleton, which was roughly 95% complete, which is awesome by the way, was originally thought to be a young Sauronitholestes. And then when it was described in 1997, it was thought to be a juvenile Velociraptor SP, because yes, we thought Velociraptor lived in North America at the time. In 2000, it was finally named Bambiraptor feinbergi, after the Disney movie Bambi. If I had a nickel for every time I mentioned Bambi in one of my videos, I'd have 2 nickels. Which is a lot of nickels. Why do I have 2 of them? It was named after Bambi due to its small size. However, the skeleton, now numbered AMNH FR30556, was of a juvenile, measuring about 3-ish feet long, or about 1 meter long, and probably weighing about 4.4-ish pounds, or about 2 kilograms. However, there have since been 2 specimens assigned to the species. While these specimens have not been properly described yet, they are reported to be of adults. The one specimen contains 34 skeletal remains from about 2 adult individuals, numbered FIP 002136, and there's an upper jaw from another adult, numbered MOR 553S73091274. What a mouthful right there. And while again these adult specimens haven't been properly described yet, it's been reported that the juvenile is 30 to 40% smaller than these adults would have been in life. Scaling up the juvenile specimen to these numbers gives us a length from 8-ish to 10-ish feet, or 2.5 to 3.3 meters, which would make it roughly the same size as Deinonychus. Though until a proper description of these 2 specimens, take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, but either way, probably not Bambi-sized. So, its name is wrong. Though I gotta admit, Bambiraptor is a really catchy name. Now, we've already established that even well-known dinosaurs can have a wrong name, such as in the case of the Oviraptor, the Parasaurolophus, but this next one you might not expect because it is so popular. This here is an animal that requires really 0 introduction at all. You can actually see it right here. This is the Stegosaurus. This dinosaur was discovered during the infamous Bone Wars. The holotype specimen YP1850 being collected by Arthur Lakes, and then being described by O.C. Marsh in 1877. Similar to the case of Therizinosaurus, the Stegosaurus was initially thought to be a very large, turtle-like reptile. But unlike in the case of the Therizinosaurus, or the scythe lizard, Stegosaurus' name didn't age as well. Stegosaurus means roof lizard, because Marsh first believed that the plates of the animal laid sort of this way over top the animal's back, like shingles or tiles of a roof. Now we of course know that Stegosaurus' plates, they go upwards, as you can see on this figure, or just on the picture I put up there. Yeah, I don't know why I'm doing this. But now we know, of course, that the plates of stegosaurs go upwards instead of, down like a shingle. So, this animal doesn't look like a roof at all. You are not a roof. You are not a roof. You are much cooler than a roof, actually. I have a soft spot for Stegosaurus. Stegosaurus is cool. Another thing that often leads to a dinosaur having a wrong name is because it is named before we really had an understanding of what dinosaurs really were. Such as in the case of Sarcolestes leedsi. Leedsi. It's Leedsi. Do you think it's Leedsi or Leedsi? I'm gonna go with Leedsi, because that's the first thing I said. The holotype of this animal being only a partial left mandible and a single tooth was found in the Lower Oxford Clay Formation of England, and it dates back to the Middle Jurassic. It was named by British naturalist Richard Lydecker in 1893, who had thought it was a theropod due to the tooth not looking like any sauropod tooth they had at the time, and also it lacked a predentary, so it couldn't be an ornithopod, he thought. He specifically thought that it was in a group called Thecodontosauridae, which, funnily enough, is now a part of Sauropodomorpha, but at the time it's part of Theropoda, so we'll stick with that for now. Due to the initial description as a carnivorous theropod, Lydecker had named the genus Sarcolestes, which translates from Greek to flesh robber. Eventually, though, another researcher in 1901 of the name Franz Nopska would make the name obsolete after figuring out, hey, this thing wasn't carnivorous, it was herbivorous. And guess what? It wasn't a theropod. It also wasn't a sauropodomorph because, Thecodontosauridae hadn't moved to sauropodomorph at the time, but they also knew it wasn't a Thecodontosaurus, so keep that in mind. Nopska placed the animal within Stegosauridae, alongside notable stegosaurids, such as Stegosaurus itself, also Stenopelix, that's a ceratopsian now. Okay, but it was also in the same family as Hylaeosaurus and Polacanthus, those are both ankylosaurians. Okay, so this was also a mess because the 3 of those 4 animals that I mentioned were in Stegosauridae at the time, we now know aren't stegosaurids at all. So, what is Sarcolestes? The most recent consensus that I could find was that Sarcolestes is an ankylosaurian notosaurid, due to the tooth resembling that of Sauropeltas. I know, I just happen to have a Sauropelta prop lying around. Wow. However, this assignment to this day is still kind of questioned and challenged, and also the validity of Sarcolestes as a whole is up for debate, because we just have so few remains of the animal. However, if it did exist, it almost certainly was not a carnivore, and it was not a flesh robber by any means. This next dinosaur doesn't really have a wrong name as much as it just doesn't exist. Such as in the case of Sarcolestes, some dinosaurs with wrong names become very controversial, and not controversial in the sense of Spinosaurus, but more in the sense of like Archaeoraptor. And that's the case of this animal here, Protoavis, a supposed theropod dinosaur allegedly from the late Triassic of Texas. Now, this animal is controversial because it allegedly is the skeletal remains of a primitive bird, which, if true, as I said, it lived in the Triassic, allegedly, it would push back the evolution of birds by over 60 million years. The main accepted hypothesis is that birds first evolved in the mid to late Jurassic, and this would push that back into the Triassic, which is insane, by the way. This is also reflected in the animal's name, of course, since that's what this video is about. The name Protoavis meaning first bird. But is this actually the first bird? The Protoavis specimen was first described and interpreted as a 13-ish inches or 35 centimeter tall carnivorous Triassic bird by Sankar Chatterjee in 1991. In this initial description of Protoavis, it's assumed by Chatterjee without a shadow of a doubt that Protoavis is Again, without a doubt, a bird. However, almost immediately after releasing his paper, he received some major backlash and criticism from the paleontological community as a whole. Because of course you would. You pushed bird evolution back 60 million years and said the first bird, which is more advanced than even Archaeopteryx, mind you. You pushed it before even the first large theropods would have evolved. That alone wasn't the main controversy of the specimen, though, that it was an early bird. If it was actually an early bird, people would have accepted it, and the theory of bird evolution would have been altered, because that's how science works. But the main controversy of the Protoavis is that the specimen is almost certainly chimeric, and that means multiple jumbled together pieces of fossils from different animals being put together in order to make a specimen, sort of like a hybrid, if you would. Nearly all researchers who had criticized Chatterjee's work agree that the fossils are a chimera of multiple Triassic archosauromorphs, which could potentially include primitive dinosaurs, but almost certainly does not include any birds. Chatterjee, when facing criticism for his work back then, he became very cocky and very ignorantly defensive about his not-so-bird first bird, replying to critics in very bad faith, again, as far as I could find. So in the end, not only is Protoavis not the first bird, not only is it not a bird in the first place, it likely isn't even a real animal. We finally make it to the last dinosaur with a wrong name on this list. And unlike the previous two, which the validity of which is very controversial, this one we know for a fact exists, and you might have actually heard of this animal. This here, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between, this is Proceratosaurus bradleyi. This smallish theropod from the Middle Jurassic of England was first discovered in 1910 by F. Lewis Bradley near Meakenhampton, a town in southwest England. It was named that same year by British paleontologist Arthur Smith Woodward, who believed it was a species of Megalosaurus at first, calling it Megalosaurus bradleyi. It should also be mentioned that at this time Megalosaurus was sort of a wastebasket taxon for fragmentary theropod remains that workers couldn't or didn't really want to figure out what it really was. So, very clearly this was not Megalosaurus. This initial specimen, a single skull catalogued as NHMUK PVR 4860 at the London Museum of Natural History, would be renamed by German paleontologist Friedrich von Huene in 1923 to Proceratosaurus. Quite clearly, Proceratosaurus is named after the Jurassic theropod Ceratosaurus, because Huene thought that this animal, the Proceratosaurus, was an early ancestor of Ceratosaurus itself, giving Proceratosaurus a name meaning before Ceratosaurus. He thought that this was an early ceratosaur because of the broken crest on the Proceratosaurus's nose, which, because of the breakage, it kind of resembles the nasal horn of Ceratosaurus nasicornis. And while Huene looked at other parts of the skull before claiming it as an early ceratosaur, it was mostly the horn. In the 1980s, however, this classification began to change as Ceratosaurus's classification itself began to change, because Ceratosaurus was found to be a very basal theropod and not a coelurosaur. This change in classification for Ceratosaurus brought a re-examination of Proceratosaurus as well. The first of these re-evaluations by Gregory S. Paul in 1998 placed Proceratosaurus next to, at the time, another crested Jurassic theropod you might have heard of called Ornitholestes. Though, we now know that animal isn't crested, by the way. The classification of Proceratosaurus would then change a lot for the next few decades, going from a basal coelurosaur to a primitive allosauroid at some point, and at one point even going back to Ceratosauridae. However, in 2010, an answer would finally emerge in a paper by Oliver Rauhut et al. This paper would conclude that Proceratosaurus was indeed a coelurosaur, but not just any coelurosaur. Proceratosaurus is an early tyrannosauroid. They found that Proceratosaurus shared a close relationship with the Chinese Guanlong, and placed these two genera in their own clade, now known as Proceratosauridae. Other genera now in this clade include animals like Dilong and Sinotyrannus. So, Proceratosaurus is not before Ceratosaurus, it is actually before Tyrannosaurus, which I think that's a really cool story. That's why I saved it for last, actually. Wow, that was a list of different dinosaurs and their classification histories and their naming histories. I just said out loud to a camera because their names didn't really match what the animal was actually like. Wow, I just did that for like 30 minutes. But anyways, if you liked this video for some reason, I would be really grateful if you left a like on the video, because likes and even shares if you want to do it, those boost these videos into the YouTube algorithm, which is ever evolving and currently being filled with AI generated slop content. So a little bit of educational content is needed in these trying times, you know. And if you for some reason want to see more videos like these, then you can check out my channel. And also you can check out my shorts if you want. I upload on YouTube and TikTok. If you want to for some reason get to know me a little more, you can check out all of my socials. Links are in the description, of course. And I guess, long story short, if you like paleontology and dinosaurs, feel free to like and subscribe for more. Credits are going, references, whoa, they're going up! Oh, there's so many! Wow, I did research for this. Look at all those papers I had to read. Yeah, we gotta do the thing. Words in the script, 3,900. I think it's probably like 3,700 if you get rid of the references page. It's a tradition we do on these videos. I already have a couple videos planned for the next sort of month. I'm not gonna say too much yet because, you know, I gotta keep some cards up my sleeve, even though my sleeves are up currently. But like, you know, I gotta keep some of my tricks. A magician never reveals his secrets. I don't know what I'm saying at this point. I'm rambling. I do this at the end of every video while the credits roll. And so I'm just gonna end it right now. You're currently in an end screen. Make sure to look at that video I've linked. And maybe subscribe to the channel, be really appreciated. Thank you! Hopefully that was 20 seconds.